I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. And hey, today I am happy to bring in another guest with me, a good friend of mine named Tom. And Tom and I worked together over the years while we were working for the police department, a couple different assignments. And I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself, though. Tom?
Well, I used to work for the Tempe Police Department. I worked there from basically the early 80s to about 2004 when I retired. I was in several assignments there. I was a detective, selective enforcement unit, SWAT. I ended my career there in internal affairs. Retired there. I was a contracted internal affairs investigator for several years at another police agency. And I am currently a defense investigator.
Interesting. I'm going to get into that a little bit. The post law enforcement career. We'll get into that a little bit more. And I wanted to, as Tom and I were talking about this, as I always do, and I have friends in here, we end up talking about 100 other things. But if you've listened to episode 17, which was What a Drag, there was a portion in that where after that guy had drugged me, some patrol guys caught him down the street. And it was Tom, and of course Tom doesn't remember this, but Tom was the guy that basically kept me from going up to the guy to ID him a little more closely and up front. But he wasn't a sergeant back then, so I didn't want to clarify that. Apparently he was just kind of like a senior officer back then and kind of let me know, you don't need to go up to that guy. Anyway, so 17, What a Drag. Tom's in that one as well in the end of it. I do want to follow up with, like I said, the career and kind of what you're doing right now. Defense work, kind of, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, so I work for attorneys who represent criminal defendants. I'm basically their investigator. Criminal defendants are entitled to their own independent investigation. And so I do the investigation for their attorneys. So I will review police reports, look at the quality of the evidence against them, possibly locate other witnesses, interview witnesses, evaluate sometimes the strength or weakness of cases for criminal defendants.
Interesting. So you're kind of on the dark side now.
That's what I've been told.
I'm sure you have. As obviously with my PI work, I do some similar stuff, not nearly to the volume that you do, but yeah, you get that crap all the time. But you know what? They're allowed to have some defense work as well, right?
Yes. There are times when people actually legitimately have issues with what they're being charged with.
Sure. Absolutely. And we also know, as we could tell many stories, probably personal stories, that the justice system is not infallible.
Correct.
Mistakes occur. People are wrongly arrested and charged. I mean, it happens. So
it happens.
Again, but Tom's doing really good with that too. I mean, we went into a lot more detail, but I did want to kind of expand on that. Well, anyway, let's get to what we're here for. Tom has a really good story, a really good incident that he was involved with that we wanted to go into. And so without further ado, tonight's episode is Friends, Foot Pursuits, and Firearms.
Okay.
So Tommy, go ahead and start off.
All right. It was at a time when you'd been in Bosnia at the time, but we were in plain clothes. It was a streets crimes unit. We were also a centralized SWAT team. And there were two teams. One team, we rotated shifts, but one team was on day shift, another team was on PM shift. During this particular time, we were on a PM shift. There were a lot of instances where we were supposed to generate our own activity. So look for our own bad guys. If there were hot spots in the area, we'd do surveillances and things like that.
Pick up prostitutes.
Yeah,
there's just a whole other area we could talk about.
Yes.
But we'll stay off of that right now.
But what we'd also do is we'd go out and look for people for the for detectives who worked in criminal investigations.
So when you say look for people, look for them for what?
When a detective would have probable cause to arrest somebody or arrest warrant for someone on a case that they were looking for and they were hard to find, we'd go out and try to find them. And a lot of times that would usually entail being undercover in plain clothes or doing surveillance work. So that's a lot of what we would do as well. On this particular night, our team had just located a person that we picked up. We had arrested him for a detective, and one of our team members, Mike, was dealing with that guy at the jail. Then I and two other team members, Jeff and Brian, we went to look for another person that I can't remember if it was Jeff or Brian. They had gotten the information from the detective on it. It wasn't something that I was directly involved in, but I was helping.
So I've kind of alluded to this in past episodes that, what Tom's describing is the same work group that I was in when we were in special investigations. And when he was saying that, different guys get information. So you'd coordinate with other detectives. Like usually one guy had like an area, like a robbery dick or a, persons crimes detective or whatever. And you would be their liaison. And if they had someone that they needed looked for, they would reach out to you. So, say that Mike, they just hooked up that guy that Mike had, that's kind of would be Mike's case. So Mike would have all the information and he would coordinate how we were going to go try to find that person. And then I wanted to kind of get into, you talk about being plainclothes and, that we would get those assignments to go find those people. So what that would mean, it could be as simple as going and knocking on a door. The guy comes to the door and you're like, hey, this is who I am. You're going to jail. Or it could get into some, very lengthy, extended, surveillance, vehicle surveillance, a lot of plainclothes, days, right. Sometimes even weeks of time to try to catch the person, depending on the severity of the crime and, the violence potential of the suspect as well. So these things could go, you could have one done in 10 minutes or you could have one that went on for 10 weeks.
Right.
So really varied, and it was, you just never knew. You never knew what it was going to be. So
right. There would even be multiple addresses you'd have to check for one person. And different places all over the valley.
Right. And that would usually be the case. Normally, crooks aren't so good about, fixing their address
right.
with DMV. So you would always have addresses, and then you'd have mama's address, and then you'd have baby's mama's addresses, and then you'd have, other associates at places. But very hard to find people sometimes. But that was part of the reason that they tasked our work group with that, is because, quite frankly, we were able to do it and do it really well. And right. These guys, like Tom just said, they already picked up this one guy. Now, boom, they're just rolling right to the next one. And that was kind of how those work days went. So
yeah, usually if you pick someone up on the first try, it was a good day. It's like you're lucky.
Exactly. So Mike's processing the first guy in the jail.
There's three of us. We go to an apartment complex in Tempe. It's at 1701 East State Street, which is essentially at the southwest corner of McClintock and 8th Street in Tempe. One of the detectives, one of our team, I think it was Jeff's project, basically. We were looking for a guy who had stolen a truck and a jet ski. We were looking for him for a detective. We all each had our own vehicles. I remember getting to the apartment complex, and there was no truck with a jet ski there. There was a specific apartment Jeff knew to check. So the plan was Jeff and Brian would go up to the apartment, and I would wait on this landing while they made contact at the apartment to see if the guy was there. And it's a 2-story apartment complex where there's a set of stairs, a landing, and then another set of stairs leading up to the second floor. So I was just waiting on the landing while they knocked on the door of this apartment to see if this guy was there. And a few minutes later, kind of Jeff stuck his head out of the apartment and kind of gave me the finger, waving me up to come up and talk to him. And what they had discovered was it looked like a group of college kids watching TV.
Well, back up a little bit, because how did they even get in there to begin with?
Okay. We were in plain clothes.
Right.
They were younger looking than I was. They knocked on the door, and someone on the other side of the door said, "Come in."
So are we allowed to just do that, Tom? If you're the cops and you go to the door and knock and someone inside says, "Hey, come in," can we do that?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yes.
And that's what they did. And once they go in, I think it was a couple guys and a girl, and they're watching TV. And at the time, I'm pretty sure that it was Friends. They were watching Friends.
TV show Friends, okay.
And I go up there, and they really look like a bunch of college kids, a group of college kids. They didn't, I don't know how to say it better, they didn't have the look of career criminals to them. But one of the kids, and by kid, they're adults. When I say kids, I'm just saying they're younger than I was.
Right.
he was basically rolling joints and they were smoking marijuana in the apartment. And what I got from Jeff when he was briefing me on what they'd found was the guy that was smoking the marijuana, rolling the joint, had the tray. Basically, I think he was sitting in a lounge chair with a tray on his lap.
So all these people are trying to do is watch some friends with Rachel and all those guys at the coffee shop and smoke some fatties, and then you guys had to interrupt it.
That's all they were doing.
Well, there you go. Okay.
All right. So the information I was getting, though, was that the guy who had the marijuana with him knew who we were looking for, had some familiarity with him. I can't remember the details of that, but we were going to try to work him, to get the information out of him, and we'd make his marijuana charge go away.
So when we're talking about working him, now we've talked about this if you listen to my podcast. What Tom's alluding to essentially is you're going to use that person to get the bigger fish in a nutshell. And when we talk about that, we're talking about an informant. So that person would be a confidential informant or a CI if you want to get technical with it. And what he's hoping to do and what we're hoping to do is tell him, hey, look, you got this dope on your lap, and we'll make this charge go away if you tell us where this bigger fish is. And again, we've talked about this on the podcast a number of times. The technique is used day in, day out, 1,000 times over. It's very effective typically, and it's just kind of, then people, gripe and moan about the fact that, well, how did that guy, he gets off scot-free? Well, that's kind of how the world works sometimes, and that is a good tool for us to use, and that's what they're trying to do here. Right. We'll get you off on the marijuana charge in return for us finding this guy.
Right. I mean, you could call it what you want and be critical if you want. This charge with the marijuana, there's no victim here. All right. The guy who we're looking for with the stolen truck and the stolen jet ski, there's a victim in that case. So anyway, going back to the story, I had the guy come out. It was very casual. I mean, we are literally wearing plain clothes. I had jeans, maybe a sweatshirt and a jacket on. It was cold out. It was in the middle of December. We brought him down to the landing where I was talking to him. And in order to make this happen, I still had to get supervisor approval. So I get on my radio to make sure this was okay. I'm sure it was going to be okay. That we make this guy's dope charge go away, but to get this other person. Right. The problem is he still loses his dope. So we were getting that approval. Eventually was approval.
It's not like TV. Did you just pour it on the ground? Or,
no, we did not pour it on.
No, you had to take it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's clarify.
So what happened was Jeff had to call a patrol officer over because it's just us we have nothing to put the marijuana in. All right. Jeff had called a patrol officer over with some packaging stuff because officers normally carry that in their cars. Baggies,
Ziploc, yeah.
Baggies, Ziploc baggies, small paper bags, something that we could put this stuff in while I'm talking to this guy. And as I'm talking to this guy, I am literally, it's a casual, non-social distancing conversation.
So not 6 feet like we are right now?
We're about 2 feet away. We're basically chatting. I don't know how else to explain it.
Okay.
And I had a gun, but it was in a fanny pack in front of me, and I had another hand in my pocket. And this guy he was agreeable to do this. And so as we're talking, I said, that's fine. I just need to make sure you are who you say you are, and I need to be able to get a hold of you when I want to get a hold of you. So do you have any ID? And he hands me a driver's license. And at this point, I think the patrol officer had arrived, or he was arriving, and Jeff went out to meet the patrol officer and trying to describe the complex. We're on kind of the interior of the complex, and it's kind of surrounded by a parking lot on the outside of the complex. Jeff went out to meet the patrol officer who had just arrived, and they were parked out by our cars, and there was a patrol car out there. So I'm still talking to this guy on the landing. He hands me a driver's license. I continue to talk to him, and then as I'm looking at the driver's license, he just doesn't seem to look like the dude in the driver's license.
Right.
And it happened really quickly. I started to get a bad feeling about this isn't the same person I'm talking to, and he bolts down the stairs. He just takes off running.
So so Jeff is out in the parking lot with the patrol officer. Where's Brian at this point?
Brian's actually still in the apartment talking to the other people who are just watching TV in the apartment.
Just trying to watch friends and smoke a little
TV.
dope. So you're kind of by yourself when this thing kicks off because those guys are doing their own gig, right? And you're not even within line of sight of anybody either.
No, we're all 3 different places. So to set the stage, I guess, Brian's inside an apartment, up the second flight of stairs, inside. I'm talking to this guy on the landing, and we literally are chit-chatting. It's not a interrogation by any means. It's very casual. And I've already told him that you're not going to, good news and bad news, you're not going to jail tonight, but you're losing your marijuana tonight, basically.
Right. So I think again, is another one of those points that, and obviously as this story unfolds, you'll see that this turns into much bigger than the guy getting his dope taken away. But, it really sheds a light on you just never know who you're talking to and what they had going on, right?
Right.
Because to Tom's admittance, he's hanging out. He's got a hand in a pocket. He's doing a lot of the things that we would tell a rookie cop, hey, don't ever do this.
If there were officer safety problems with this, that there were. I mean,
right.
This is what
done
not to do
but we've
from an
all
officer
done
safety standpoint.
And the other point that I will make is a lot of times, especially in that assignment, part of your ability to get people to roll on other folks or to give up the locations of other people was you had to be personable with them. You had to be able to relate, and you couldn't come off as RoboCop. You had to be kind of that way. So that kind of led into that mentality. So it's not, it's not like Tom was the first guy or the last guy to ever do that. We all did that. So you would be trying to talk a guy into giving somebody up, especially if you're talking about a family member or brother, sister, whatever. You did. Oftentimes you were probably way more casual than you should have been. I mean,
right.
That's fair, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
especially when I already knew we weren't going to arrest him.
Exactly. But again, it enhances that concept of we just don't know.
Right.
We can have what we know in our mind of dude got caught with his dope. He's going to lose his dope, but he's not going to get charged with it. So this should be a total no-brainer, no big deal. Everything's copacetic. Let's just all relax here too. Okay, wait a minute. Pictures don't line up, and then boom, dude bolts. Right? And this is within probably a matter of 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Less?
Yeah, we're
pretty quick.
By the time I got the driver's license and I'm seeing it and I'm looking at him, I'm kind of looking at the driver's license.
Doing the up
and down.
Yeah.
Thinking this isn't him.
Right.
He bolts and runs down the stairs.
Okay.
He takes off running. He gets down the stairs and a full head of steam running away from me before it clicked. And I'm thinking, where are you going?
Right.
It's just
what just happened?
What just happened here?
Right.
And I'm sitting there now. I'm all by myself on the landing with holding some guy's driver's license, and he's running. Well, he runs in the direction of a break in the building where our cars were parked and where Jeff was meeting with the patrol officer out in the parking lot. And what I didn't know at the time was, I watched him run through the break in the building. What I didn't know at the time is as he ran right past Jeff and the patrol officer. And as he ran past the two of them, he's basically pulling the gun out of his waistband.
Handgun.
And continues running. A handgun.
So had you put anything out on a radio, or did you even have a radio with you at the time?
I didn't even have my radio with. I may have had it, but I didn't put anything out.
So as this unfolds again, you'll find that we talked about the story. We're pretty confident that the patrol officer there was the one that actually was given updates to dispatch about the ongoings. But in that work group, as we've talked, you would oftentimes start foot pursuit, fight, gun, usually not a shooting, but tackles, handcuffs on finally, and then you would come on to dispatch and say, this is Sam 42, and we got one in custody at XYZ location. It just didn't really happen that way with that work group very frequently, whereas with patrol, or the way it should be, you should be updating radio.
Right.
Like kind of the first thing that in theory is if that foot pursuit kicks off, you'd be, hey, Sam 42 foot pursuit at XYZ, so that people know where to go to help you out, because otherwise nobody knows what's going on.
Right.
So, but again, just like we said, that's just kind of how we used to do things as a work group. And in this case, thankfully, the patrol officer was there to kick out the info.
Right.
So dude runs out.
Yeah.
They see him running. They're doing the same thing like, whoa, what's wrong with this picture? Especially as a gun's coming out of the waistband, right? So go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't know it at the time. I found that out later. And you're right, I didn't put anything out on the radio. My first instinct is to start chasing him, which I did. And so as I'm chasing him, by this time he had already made it through the break in the building. He had already run right past the two officers. I get through the break of the building. He makes a left-hand turn, which would he'd be going westbound on the north side of the complex, in around the parking area. And then I make my turn, and I could see those two officers chasing him, and then I could hear them yelling, "Drop the gun." I mean, they're yelling it a lot, and my first instinct is, what gun? I didn't see a gun. Are we talking about the same guy?
Right. So now in a matter of probably 30 seconds, you've gone from chilling out, hand in the pocket, hey, dude, you're not even going to go to jail. We're just going to take your dope, to foot pursuit and people yelling about someone having a gun.
Right.
Okay.
So the chase is on. He's ahead of them. They're behind him, chasing him, and I'm chasing them. So we get to the point where the complex ends at the far west end of the complex, and there's a drive that turns back southbound into the complex. Well, at this point, the guy stops. The officers are still behind him, and as I'm catching up, I can see them. They have their guns pointed at him, and they're still yelling, "Drop the gun." At that point, I still didn't quite see the gun. They're fanned out. Hard to explain what fanned out means, but they're one's kind of off to the farther to my right, one's closer to my right, and then as I catch up, I'm basically on this left side of three guys behind one guy as he's going back into the complex, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And what Tom's describing in fanned out is what we do is if you have a confrontation like that, the last thing you want to do is be all grouped up. So we don't want to be in a big bunch of three guys standing there, because if the guy spins around and starts cranking rounds, the likelihood of hitting all three is really good. Whereas if you're separated from each other, that's much better, because it's much harder for them to get hurt or get hit. It also provides opportunity for any cover or concealment to one guy, whereas if they're all three bunched up in the middle of that driveway, there's nothing.
Right.
So that's kind of where he's going with that. So three guys fanned out.
Right.
Dude, he stopped or he's walking?
Now he's walking at this point.
And is he saying anything?
He's not saying anything. The two officers are still saying, "Drop the gun." Then I see the gun, and it's in his right hand, and that's when I drew my gun. And then I joined in the chorus of "Drop the gun."
How far away are you guys from him at this point?
He's probably 10, 15 feet ahead of us at this point, because he had stopped.
That's close.
Yeah, maybe 20, but it's top. But we just got done, and we'd also just got done running. So now we're walking.
Everybody's catching their breath.
Yelling, breathing, pointing guns. And
does he even, is he even registering that all you guys are yelling? I mean, obviously he knew he ran from the cops. He knows that you've seen the gun because you're yelling that, but is he even acknowledging that he's hearing you or anything? Or is he just walking?
He's walking. I mean, obviously he knows we're there.
Right.
Because at this point now he's got it at the gun at what's referred to as a low ready, which he's got this gun pointed out in front of him, and it's kind of pointed down a waist, kind of below his waist.
Okay.
And so we're fanned out. I'm basically on the far left side of this fan. Jeff's in the middle. John, the patrol guy, is on the right, and then this guy's kind of in the middle, ahead of us,
right,
more towards the center. I still remember seeing a bush when I first saw that gun, and I start to duck down behind this bush, and then thinking about what an idiot I am about ducking behind this bush, because this bush isn't going to stop a bullet.
Not a bullet stopper.
Pretty much you could see me behind the bush, and it's like me hiding behind a bouquet of flowers.
It's like a Monty Python moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're yelling, "Drop the gun." He's at this low ready, and he keeps kind of basically turning from left to right, not quite turning to face us, but kind of peeking from his left, peeking to his right, if I'm making sense, where he's kind of seeing us over his shoulder.
Do you think he was maybe looking for where direction he was going to go to, or was he just trying to catch you in his peripheral?
I think he was assessing who was there
Okay.
behind him.
Okay.
That's the sense I got.
Got it.
And now at this point, now he's got this gun. He's walking back in. He's got it the low ready. Now he's walking back in towards the apartment complex. So in the parking lot where there's cars, the apartment's there. Plus people are there. And then we're behind him. And again, he's got this low ready thing going with the gun. Basically, if he turned and pulled the trigger, we wouldn't have time to really react to shoot him.
So, and I think this is a great point. And when Tom and I were preparing to record this episode, we talked about this quite a bit. But the one thing that I do want to get across is the fact that just a couple of weeks prior, Tom, we had a SWAT training. And again, I was out of country at the time, so I wasn't there. But they had a SWAT training. And a lot of times in these SWAT trainings, as was the case in this one, we used simunitions, which is essentially rounds. They're paintball rounds, but they load into a regular firearm. So it's a great training tool. And they hurt like hell. I mean, they're like getting hit with paintballs. I mean, they hurt. Well, in the simunition training that Tom had gone to, they had done exactly this, which we call proactive and reactive exercises. So as an example, you would have someone standing in front of you with a gun, exactly the way Tom's describing, and you would be told, okay, as soon as that person tries to shoot you, you can go ahead and shoot him. You can engage. Well, you will never beat a proactive movement. Reaction is always going to be secondary. So that person in the training would be able to raise the gun and get off a round or two before you would be able to recognize it, process it, start to take your physical action and fire the gun in reply to his fire. So what timing? I mean, for this to have happened, for you guys to have done all those exercises, because again, we don't do them every single training, but the fact that they did it, I think probably helped your mindset at that point in time to recognize. And again, folks, we've talked about this. The job as a cop is not to get shot first. You know, our job is to stop people from getting hurt, period. So in a deadly force situation where someone's got a gun, you have two responsibilities. One is to keep that person from seriously injuring or killing you. And your second priority is to keep them from seriously injuring or killing another person. So while this guy's walking away, the gun's pointed down at the ground in front of that person, he could easily turn and fire a round back at one of these three officers that are following, in all honesty, before we would even get a shot off. Correct assessment?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, we want to make sure that we get that across because it's such an important part of this story. And again, I think it's going to lend into Tom's mental process and his thought process as this story progresses and things get worse. So go ahead, Tom.
All right. Well, so this continued for a few seconds as he's getting closer to the cars, closer to there. We're still fanned out behind him. And he does this peeking over his shoulders to me, to John, never completely turns around. And at one point, he turns towards me, not towards me, but does that peek again with the low ready, and then goes all the way around, does the peek towards John. And that's when I made the decision to shoot. Okay, so I'm going to back you up just a smidge. What else are you thinking about? As this guy's walking and he's starting to walk toward essentially that inner courtyard area again, or walking in that direction, what's your thought process? I mean, what are you thinking here? I'm thinking this guy could turn and shoot any one of us at any time. Okay. He's been told, I don't know how many times, to drop the gun, and all he would have had to do is drop the gun and this would be over. Right. Plus, he's going back into an apartment complex where there are people. If someone comes out to their car, I mean, at the point we're at now, either he could shoot him. At that point, nobody was in our line of fire. So there are several potential threats, I guess, or carjacking, targets, anything. Yeah. So my thought process, it was time to put a stop to it. Okay. And again, I keep saying the same thing over and over, but this kind of lends itself to the theory of if you have a person with a gun, or let's even downgrade it if that's the proper term, but to a knife. As the police, you can't just let them continue to walk away from you for a day. You know what I mean? People talk about that. Well, why did you shoot that person? Especially when it's a situation like this where there's no one around in a parking lot, and they really question and don't understand the concept of why did the police have to shoot him then? There was no one around. Well, that's the reason they did shoot him then, was because there was no one around. There's no one else that could potentially get injured.
Whereas if you wait until they do run across somebody, it's too late by then. That person's been taken hostage. They've jumped in their car and they've taken off as a carjack. They've been shot or something worse. There's a million things that could happen. So Tom's thought process is exactly what we're trained to do, which is you have to resolve the situation when it's the most advantageous and the safest for law enforcement. So what he's doing and what he's thinking is exactly what, quite frankly, that's what we want the cops to be thinking. That's the mindset you want to be in. You don't want to be thinking about, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. You don't want to be thinking about, I'm afraid to take care of this situation and handle the situation. There's a whole lot of other things that, as an average citizen put into a situation like this, totally different mindset. Runaway is probably the biggest mindset that a citizen would have if they saw this. Think about it. If you're cruising through your neighborhood and you see a dude walking down the sidewalk with a gun, you're going to get the hell out of there. So it's a completely different mindset. And the reason that I really like to harp on this, and I do in some other episodes, is I want people to really understand what cops go through when they're in a lethal force or a potentially lethal force situation. Well, it is a lethal force because, as Tom's already started in, we'll get back to, is he made the decision to fire. So, let's just pick it up right there. So can you go into a little more detail of what triggered you to go from essentially low ready, gun down, giving commands to raising the gun, lining the sights up and firing the rounds?
Right. The main thing was there were the incidents as once I caught up to the other two officers and once I realized that this guy really did have a gun. Like I said, when I was hearing him yell, drop the gun, thinking, what gun?
Right.
And I got close enough and I saw I really did have a gun. As I come up, he's got a gun in hand at a low ready position. Okay, that's a position that you take right before you point at something and shoot at it. So my thought process is he's not giving up. He's making a decision at some point to shoot one of us or shoot somebody else. So after a couple of times of this peeking over the shoulders with the gun at the low ready, I'd seen enough. It was time to put a stop to it, and that's why I fired. And at that point, I did fire. It was the time where he was actually turned away from me. Now he was turning towards the patrol officer who had arrived.
So I agree with you. You have a really long and lengthy career like Tom and I have had. I can think of a couple instances that are quasi-similar to this. Obviously no shooting, but the looking over the shoulder at the peripheral, to me, what that tells me is that guy's basically trying to make sure he knows where you're at, so when he spins around, he can shoot you easier. That's what that says to me. So I totally agree with you on that. And then, it comes back to, as the cops, you don't wait till you get shot. You have to take action when you think it's come to that point of where it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And that's where you got to. Does that sound about right?
Right.
So Tom didn't fire in protection of his life so much. It was more so because he felt that the threat was going to turn and fire on the patrol guy, John.
Right.
So again, perfectly normal. And that's what we train. That's what we train to do. So you make that decision and you fire.
Right.
Do you recall sight picture? Do you recall the positioning of the person, the guy, or any of that kind of stuff? What do you recall specifically about that point in time?
What I recall from the time is not hearing my gun.
Interesting.
I do recall sight picture. I recall taking aim. I know I fired 3 times. There's talk like people don't know how many times they fire. I know I fired 3 times, but he was going down after the 3rd shot, so I stopped pulling the trigger, basically. So that's the type of stuff I do remember of the dynamics of the shooting itself.
Yeah.
But I do remember not. I don't know how to say it. I do remember not remembering hearing my gun go off.
Interesting. Which again, a lot of police shootings or other shootings, they have what's called auditory occlusion, which is essentially your hearing shuts down because the body is trying to focus all its energy and its focus on the things that it needs, which at that point in time is your eyeballs. Right. Because you got to use your eyeballs and you got to send the signal down to your trigger finger to make sure that shot is squeezed off. And so that's what happens is a lot of time you have that auditory occlusion. People often also talk about tunnel vision. And in some cases, normally you'd have a really big peripheral vision that's, darn near 90 degrees from the side of your head.
Right.
But, that really closes in because, again, your body is telling you, let's focus on the threat. Let's focus everything that we are on this threat. So did you have any of the tunnel vision at all?
I don't remember the tunnel vision.
So then you probably didn't.
I don't think I did. But what the sticking out, the not remember hearing anything sticks out.
Yeah, and that's just because, again, if you've never fired a gun, even when you're outside, I mean, it is extremely loud. It's not something that you would expect to not hear. So it's funny that you didn't hear it. So that happened. But anyway, so you fire the rounds. You fire the 3 rounds that you counted, and you say he starts to go down. Pick it up from there?
He goes down. I know by this point, I know this now from. I didn't know it at the time, but at this point, I know the cavalry was coming, basically, because
the patrol guy
guy had put something out on the radio that he was chasing him. I didn't know it at the time, and so within a short period of time, I had the shooting. Jeff kind of pushes me away a little bit, but they go and start working on the guy I just shot because he was still conscious, and then other patrol officers came and then they start treating him. Paramedics eventually come and start treating him.
So, here's another point that is kind of odd and strange to understand, but here's a great example of you can be involved in, well, I don't even know if it's a great example. It's the example, because anytime you engage or fire upon a suspect, you are required to immediately start to render aid, which is so diametrically opposed. It's such an odd concept, but that is the way it is. The expectation is there, just like in this situation. So Tom fires on this guy, totally legitimate, within the law, the whole thing. And then when they see that, he's injured and he's no longer technically a threat, because I can assume that the gun fell away.
Gun ends up on the ground.
Gun falls away, so he doesn't have a hold of the gun any longer. What do? They have to immediately shift into life-saving efforts. And from our prior discussion, you mentioned that he had been hit in the shoulder and the elbow?
Back shoulder blade, left elbow, and then my third round missed somewhere.
Okay. So apparently the round that hit the elbow was a pretty devastating round, and it actually severed an artery.
Right.
So if they didn't do anything, the guy would have bled out.
Right.
No question. So one of the officers that had responded did that. Now,
right.
I will say, especially in a situation like this where these guys, there's more than just Tom on the scene, what you would try to do is, Tom's really not the guy that should try to go up and render aid at that point. Tom's the guy that pulled the trigger, fired the rounds, ended the problem, but he's really not the guy that we want essentially going hands-on with the guy, not because he's going to hurt him at all. It's just Tom just went through a massively emotional, traumatic experience. So we kind of want to back him out of that. So it's good that other people jumped right in and started handling the business. I mean, would you agree as well? Yeah. So the cavalry shows up. Thank goodness patrol guys are a lot better on radios than we were in SAU. They render aid. The one guy that renders aid, I do remember he actually got a life-saving award, because had he not done what he did, which was applied pressure, he would have bled out.
Right.
So that guy, kudos for him. Dan, I think it was. So what are you doing while all this is going on? What are you doing?
I'm basically standing. I'm a spectator at this point, because I know enough now, or I knew enough at that point to know, okay, we're going to have an investigation, and I'm going to be investigated for having this shooting. I know the guy's being taken care of. So at this point, I'm a spectator,
which is proper.
Right.
That's kind of the way it should be at that point. Again, if take this in a whole different context, you're the only person there, God forbid, it's going to have a much different dynamic, but that's how it should be. So he gets treated. What happens from then?
He gets treated. I know at this point, I'm in the oh crap mode. I just had a shooting. I basically wait for things to happen, because I know certain things are going to happen now. I know I'm going to be interviewed for the shooting. There's going to be an investigation. It's going to take a long time. I remember knowing that I needed to call my wife to let her know I was okay, which I got to do that. Then someone else got on the phone with her to make sure I was going to be okay, and if there what I could do with her. I specifically remember someone telling someone to go get me some M&Ms. That was big.
Because that's your comfort food?
That was my comfort food.
Oh, God, how funny. How funny.
Yeah.
But so That's important to you, though.
Yeah.
That was important that your wife was aware that you were okay.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when we would have a shooting, or especially, SWAT call out, Riviera, Malibu, all those, as soon as that you would have that incident occur, that was one of the first things that we all wanted to do, is make sure that our wife knew that we were okay.
Right.
That always happened. So especially when you take it, exponentially further, where you're the guy who did pull the trigger, probably was even more important to you.
Right.
To make sure that she was aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And did you have any like emotions or anything, or was it? I mean, what was your mindset? Were you? I don't know. The process, and I think that's exactly how I would have looked at it. Is okay. I know that now, A through Z is going to occur. But what else did you think, other than wanting your wife to know? What else were you thinking?
I remember thinking, I knew the guy was still conscious, after I shot him. And I remember thinking, I hope he didn't die, because I don't know what else to, it was bad enough that I just did that. So I was thinking he would have survived. I was basically second guessing myself. I hope this all turns out okay. I was replaying everything in my head. I was thinking about the patrol officer who he was just showing up there to bring us a baggie. And now he gets in the middle of this thing.
Right. Poor dude's just rolling up to give you guys some supplies, and the next thing you know, you're getting him into a shooting.
The next thing he knows, he just barely got there.
He barely got there.
And some guy is running past him, pulling a gun out.
And one other question I wanted to ask, did the other two officers engage? Did they shoot?
They didn't.
They did not. So it brings up an interesting point again of, perception, where you draw the line. Experience, I think, factors in quite a bit as well, as to when an officer will and will not fire or take any action against a suspect, whether it's as simple as engaging, with a taser, or even just going hands-on with them, all the way up to using lethal force with a firearm. So in those two guys' minds, their triggers, so to speak, well, that's a bad term, their lines in the sand hadn't been met, whereas Tom's had. Tom had made his line in the sand based on X amount of inputs of information that was the proper time to take action. And apparently in those guys' minds, it wasn't. Is it right or wrong? Not at all. Because again, it's all perception. I mean, we know from experience now, even, body cams are a big deal. The difference in the body cam's perception of an incident, just because it's worn on the chest versus the level of your eyes on your head, that can make a difference in some of these cases, where they show the difference of what is seen versus what's recorded can make or break a situation. So, that's a simplistic way to look at it. But when you start putting it in human terms, where Tom is with other officers, you just never know. There's a million different pieces of information that are being processed to make that decision. I find it interesting that I think you and I are a lot alike mentally, because those are the exact things that I think I would be thinking of as one, is this a good shoot?
Right.
Did I do the right things? Should I have done something different? I do think that I would, as you did, I think I'd be happy that the guy hadn't died.
Right.
And again, is just another, I try to beat people over the head with this. Cops don't want to kill people. Cops really don't want to shoot anybody either. And so it brings up the reality of, that's one of Tom's first thoughts is, I hope this guy doesn't die. And that's a human thought. That's a human feeling. And again, once again, not a bunch of dirty Harrys out there running around whacking people all noon and then going and grabbing our hot dog from the vendor down the corner. That's what he thought. That's one of the first thoughts that came to his mind. So I find all that stuff interesting. So back to the incident, those are the things that you're thinking. What happened kind of once everything had settled down, and because obviously the guy got transported for treatment.
Right.
What happened then?
Well, I did the interviews the interview I had to do that night. It was investigated. Got sent home. You go on the 3-day admin leave. I know the very following morning, this happened late at night, so very following morning, my daughter, who was young at the time, I had to grab her before she went to school to let her know what happened, in case it made the news or something like that. And so I had to make sure. So I had to talk with her what happened, and then send her off to school. Do you have to go to a psychological evaluation before they let you go back to work? I did that, and then I ended up going back to work.
Did you? Well, we talked about this. You remember this clearly.
Yes.
Like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So again, another, these things are not daily occurrences. Stuff like this is usually kind of a once in a career thing. It's rare that an officer has more than one shooting during the course of their career. It's usually they have none. So did you have any lingering long-term, issues or things you thought of? You had nightmares? You have anything like that at all?
No, I never really had that. I had a lot of support. I didn't have that. I do remember when I went back to work hoping I don't get in a shooting that night.
Yeah.
But other than that, no.
Did you have any apprehension to go back to work?
No, just not wanting to, just a concern of what if this happens again?
Yeah.
And not just, I don't know how to explain it. It's just, I really don't need this happen on the first night I come back to work again.
Even though you know that the odds of it happening again are like exponentially low,
right?
You still have the thought.
What are the odds? But then what are the odds of what happened the night before happening?
Exactly. Do you think that had this guy died, that you would have reacted different?
I can't honestly say. I'm sure I would have had different feelings about how it ended up.
Yeah. Interesting. Anything in the aftermath? Did you go to court on it? Did you have any contact with the guy? Anything else come up at all?
No. He ended up getting prosecuted. He ended up getting a plea offer. I was amenable to the offer as the victim, and I think he ended up getting charged with aggravated assault on all three of us
For
having the gun.
Okay.
With the gun, and as it turned out, he was actually had a warrant for armed robbery before.
So I was just going to ask you, so why the hell did the guy even run? So that's why he gave you the fake ID too.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to get out of that.
Right.
And so, I mean, obviously, well, again, we can't read minds. It would sure be awesome if you could read minds to see what they're thinking. But so you contact this dude thinking that this is just a normal college age kid, that he got busted for having a little bit of weed. And in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I'm about to go to jail for my robbery rap.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. So, wow. Okay. What about the guy that you guys were initially looking for with the truck and the jet ski? What happened to that dude?
I honestly don't know. Like I said, this wasn't my caper. Basically, I was there helping.
Right.
I don't know if they eventually caught him or not. I just know that they were looking for on a case where someone had a guy who had stolen a truck and a jet ski. Apparently, he was known to frequent that apartment, and that's why we were going to find him there. And then somewhere in the conversation, when Jeff and Brian were up there talking to the guy that I shot, there was some connection there where he had indicated he was familiar with the person that they were looking for.
Yeah. You a little bit bigger fish to fry at the time, I suppose. You kind of forgot about that.
So I don't know if they ended up catching that guy.
How funny. So do you think that, because again, Tom went on to be a supervisor, and you also went to internal investigations. So you ended up being the guy who went out to the shootings as well, right?
Yes.
So yeah, you saw both sides of that.
Right.
Do you think that having been involved in your shooting, that helped prepare you for that position in IA?
It gave me a lot of perspective.
I'll bet.
Right.
I'll bet it did.
And normally what happens in a shooting like that, so that night, basically there's a criminal investigation and then there's the internal investigation. What I got interviewed that night was the criminal investigation, because there's going to be a criminal investigation, and that takes the first priority. And basically what they determine is if any crime had been committed by the officer doing the shooting.
Right.
And then it eventually goes to an internal investigation where what you're doing is determining whether or not policies have been violated or not.
Or ways we can improve.
We're training, things like that.
Right. So one of the things that I do recall, I shouldn't say recall, one of the things that just kind of brings to mind when I talk about shootings, and, again, because having not been involved with one, but I have a lot of friends that have, you and a whole bunch of other people. But I remember years ago, there would be some pretty questionable shootings, and you would be thinking, wow, how did that guy get away with that? Whereas now I think that that's turned completely around. I think that, and this is more just for kind of the general public to be aware, but I think that if there's a bad shooting, I don't know if that's a great term to use, but if it's a bad shooting, I think it's much more likely to have some light shed on it.
Right.
Because cops get prosecuted now.
Right.
If it's a bad shoot, and we could all think of a few in our minds, but if it's a bad shoot, they're prosecuted. Whereas, like I said, years ago, we would hear, I don't know if you remember, but I would hear some things that happened in some other jurisdictions. I'm not going to say who, but you would look at it and go, holy shit, how did that how did that guy not get prosecuted?
Right.
Because that's just not what happened back then. I mean, it would have to be so egregious back then. Again, we're talking 20 plus years, whereas now it's much different. But I think part of that too is a result of, we learn, we see how things go. And in smaller doses, guys like you are involved in something and later on able to translate that into how you handle things down the road as well. When you're in that position. Interesting. Tom, do you have anything else that you want to add or anything else that you remember from the whole incident?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
I think we hit quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think we hit quite a bit. Well,
the one thing seeing you again, though.
It was. It's great. And that's one of the things I love about these interviews is catching up with the guys. The only thing that I really have to add is I recall, again, I was in Bosnia. I was working in Bosnia at the time. I'd taken a leave off of work to go to work in Bosnia for a year. And that's a big, long story in and of itself. But we had limited communication over there, obviously, because of the conditions. And a friend, I think it was my roommate, knew some people, but he said, hey, one of your guys was involved in a shooting. And, of course, there's some concern. And the first thing is, well, is he okay? Like, yeah, he's okay. So obviously the level comes down by 50%. It wasn't like there were telephones. I mean, half the time we didn't have electricity over there because everything was just still blown to hell. Everything was all damaged up. But I really wanted to reach out and check on you, So I finally found a working phone and I got permission to go through XYZ, some process. I don't remember, but I finally got through to the office. And I think it was like almost a week later by the time I was able to get through. But I remember, one of the guys answered the phone and I said, hey, is Tommy there? I'm like, hey, this is Kevin. They're like, Kevin? I'm like, yeah, from Bosnia. I used to work there. Hello. I ain't been gone that long, knucklehead,
Kevin who?
Yeah, Kevin who? It's Dave. So I remember getting a hold of you on the phone and just checking on you and seeing how you're doing and everything. And I didn't get a lot of the story, but it was just more of a, hey, Tom, I heard about it and I hope you're doing okay and everything else. And you sounded good. Sound like usual, Tom. Nope, I'm okay.
It was that type of stuff that I really appreciated at the time.
Yeah, and it's important. What I like you were saying, you had a lot of support, and I think that helps also. Yeah. So, but that was kind of the last thing I wanted to add because I always remembered it, and it was nice because I to this day I remember where I was at in the office at the phone and hanging the phone up and just kind of having just relief.
Right.
Because I heard your voice and I heard you were fine and you sounded like same old Tommy.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, he's fine. Everything's good. So anything else?
No, I think that's it.
I think that's it. Well, again, thank you so much for coming in, Tom. It's a great story and it was great catching up with you and everything else. So, all right, guys. Well, with that, I am going to close this episode of I Barely Got Here. I want to thank you for listening. And if you like the show, please subscribe, post a review, and also ask your friends to give it a listen. If you have a question or a comment, I ask you to shoot me an email at ibarelygothere@gmail.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And with that, Sam42.
Sam420.
We are 10-7.